Foundry's TAM is a lot larger. It's something that came later on in the timeline of the business. And then we're sort of searching as long-term investors for what's going to keep this growth going. We're very much at the start of Palantir's growth curves on everything, despite their age as a company. But it's very helpful to have a master plan that the employees are aware of, that shareholders that are aware of, and that the public can look in and see what's happening and see the long-term goals and see how the company is executing against them. So I think builders could be, or maybe it won't always end up being called that, but that mainstream, more mass market product for businesses to be able to utilize and analyze, crunch all of their data and turn it into actionable insights, as Palantir always talks about. That could be builders, it could be a consumer product. I'm not saying that Palantir needs this third or fourth layer, and it's definitely not necessary for the next 10 years. They have a lot. I think they are really set for the medium term. But I think there could be something to be said about laying out a long-term master plan.
Welcome back to the channel, all you Palantir cowboys. I know, it's rough out there, but hopefully today I can answer some of maybe Jackson's questions about the long-term plans for Foundry. This is my opinions, it's not coming from Palantir, but essentially I want to look at the network effects of Foundry and how the more people that use Foundry, the bigger this is going to become, the more valuable the system will become. And this is based on my usage of Foundry and my understanding of how templates work and essentially how ontologies work. And so get ready. We're going to dive into it. I know we're all tired of getting knocked out by the stock price. But today, hopefully, I'll give you something that will make you not lose faith. All right, let's take a quick attempt at kind of talking a little bit more about what an ontology-based application might be like, and then why it's going to be beneficial for Foundry customers. Let's take our Foundry for gaming, kind of primitive gaming model. Let's say we have players, and I'm not saying this is how I would actually define these entities, it's just for demonstration purposes. We have events, right, and we have games. There's other entities that are going to come out of this, but let's just stick with something simple, right? And let's just say games will create events, right? Players play games, right? Cool. And maybe we call this users, or we could, and let's just go ahead and kind of model that as a pretty standard relationship. All right, so now I have this like neat little graph, and this is like what an ontology basically is, right? It is defining the entities and their relationship to each other. And there can be multiple things in here too. Like users can also, users can do other things obviously, but you may have multiple relationships between an entity depending on, what they do with that game. So like another thing might be that users make purchases, right, in games. So they play games, but then maybe they also say purchase games, right? So that would be an example of another type of thing the user does. Okay, so this is our basic ontology. Okay, it's just defining the nodes and the relationship between the nodes. Why is that beneficial for an application though? Like, why do I want to build apps that kind of talk about data in this way? Well, there's some reasons. I think the first one being that applications become instantly interoperable if they were all talking about data this way, with specific definitions around what a user is, what a game is, what events are. And there's actually been some research done into this already. There's this thing called the semantic web, and you can read about it on Wikipedia, but basically there are open standards about what things actually are, and Google championed this a while back, and it deals a lot with this type of ontology-based system and reasoning. Google's famously did this to power their search engine. So like, spoiler alert, Google actually powers its search engine off a knowledge graph, right? That's how Google knows what you're talking about. It's what gives the search terms meaning which also makes their spell check engine super good, right? Like, because they can figure out based on the context of how you're using a word, like basically by running it through this knowledge graph, they can tell by the relationships in the graph when they find these entities in your search terms what you're talking about, which affects the spelling that they'll opt to give you when you misspell something for their search engine. Google's knowledge graph has like billions of entities in it. So like, let's take a look at what we can find online. And this is how they went from like strings to things, right? So like if you want to read about Google's knowledge graph, you can come into Wikipedia. There's some decent things in there, but like to give you an idea how big these ontologies get, like you can see the estimates in here about the amount of information being tracked in that ontology system. And so 500 billion facts on 5 billion entities. That's a lot of information, but they've essentially created like a universal ontology for the web that we use every day. And we see how powerful that is, right? We have a common way we talk about knowledge now that's available online. That's incredible. So like definitely this is not a new idea. This has been used for a while. There's lots of other applications for graphs and ontologies in machine learning and in data analytics, way beyond what we're talking about here. But that's one example of why ontologies are important and how they're used. What does that mean for Palantir? Well, to date, there aren't really a lot of platforms that allow the average company to build an ontology-based app. There's Neo4j and there's Neo4j. No, just kidding. There are other graph databases out there like dgraph. But no one's really been able, this is a problem of network effects, because until everyone is using the same platform, not everyone there won't be any benefit to you, company A, just building an ontology that no one else accesses or uses, right? This is a problem of network effects. This is what makes software valuable, right? Anyone can build a Twitter in probably a weekend. You can code that up. You can't necessarily scale it to Twitter scale. That's what people don't tell you. But also, like, it doesn't matter because no one's using it. It's just an island app. No one cares about that thing. But so why does it matter for Palantir? Well, the cool thing is in Palantir, everything is built on an ontology system, and I can share that ontology with other Foundry customers, right? So like this might be a system boundary. Let's start making some system boundaries so we can kind of model this. And we're going to call this is going to be the game plumbing framework system boundary. And that's Aman and his company, and Dan. So let's just call them, they're just a company, they'll be a company. We're all going to be companies here. Let's send that to back, and let's put their ontology in there, and let's kind of think about another company, right? Let's call this company AWS, for example. That's always a good one. And let's just say AWS has, let's see, services, and maybe they have a particular service called EC2. And then they have another service called ECS, or I already just said the ECS. That's what I wanted, actually. And let's just say services, this is an instance of, so EC2 is an instance of AWS services. And let's just say that game plumbing frameworks, games, run right on ECS. ECS is Elastic Container Service. So we say runs on, right? And let's just say that AWS has another service called, let's just call this DynamoDB. And events, and this is also an instance of that service. All right, so we're going to label that instance of, and let's just say that events are stored in DynamoDB. Wow, now we have an ontology system that spans multiple companies, right? Where part of the application is running and defined in one organization, and the other part is defined and running in another organization. And what we can kind of think about here is, what does that mean for the future of Foundry customers? Well, I can say that this is a Foundry system boundary. So let's just label it so we can think about this more clearly. And we'll say Foundry system boundary. And let's make that a dashed line. Take the arrowhead out of there so we don't get confused. Come on, Lucid. There we go. All right. Now, if I want to build, if I'm a organization, not only can I share the ontology between my orgs here and inside Foundry, where I can now start analyzing my data by sharing without replication. This is also important. The copy of this ontology, I can interact with it in Foundry, like assuming Foundry would actually support this type of connectivity, I can now start building Foundry apps, right? So we'll have like let's label these like Foundry apps down here. And Foundry, let's call it a workshop app, right? All right, so like I have a Foundry workshop app that's part of Game Plumbing Framework, but now it's using a portion of the AWS ontology to do its modeling, right? And write back capabilities. Like maybe I want to trigger ordering of a service or billing usage or anything, like putting a billing alarm in AWS, defining that through phonograph. So let's just say phonograph and actually put it in the right place. In my ontology, phonograph is a component of the ontology in Foundry, could then say trigger a write back to AWS down here in the ontology API that's part of Foundry, right? And do stuff. So like do stuff. And what it could do is it could interact with the ontology API and trigger things like a new service consumption. Like I want to make a new database. I want to spin up an EC2 instance. I want to, and this should be ECS, Elastic Container Services. I want to change my Elastic Container Service cluster, right? Or maybe I want to get data about, my telemetry events that are happening in AWS. AWS has CloudWatch logs and a ton of like reporting data about your network traffic. And maybe I want to analyze that in Foundry. So this is just like an example of if these people, which AWS is not going to run Foundry, but it's just an example, right? Of how I could actually start modeling another organization's data because we talk about it in the same way through a common ontology system that has relationships, behaviors, state and attributes, all of those things. And there are other capabilities inside Foundry's ontology system to define more complex things like time series data and other types of things. But because we all talk about it the same way, we can now interact under a common system, right? Foundry is providing this data connectivity layer, this data connective tissue in which the network effects are massive, right? The more people that use Foundry and model in their ontology system, the more people that can connect to them and share resources in Foundry together. Another thing you can do are create Foundry templates, right? And I can actually share a Foundry template between organizations. So like, let's just say I have a Foundry template and I can actually share that. That Foundry template might be my workshop app, right, that I've created. Maybe I want to share that with another company, and let's just copy our system boundary and bring that over here. And maybe I want to share that with my, I don't know, like who would be a good partner? Maybe it's going to be, who would be a good partner for us over at Game Plumbing Framework? Andreessen Horowitz, maybe. I don't know. So Andreessen Horowitz, right? And we want to share an investment template that talks about our financials with Andreessen Horowitz. Okay, well, we can do that, and the way we're going to do that is through the templates API, right? So come over here. I believe it's the templates API. Don't quote me on that. Palantir people, you can comment on which API you'd actually be calling to send this template over to Andreessen Horowitz that would contain the financial data that we exported out of Foundry and part of our workshop app. Or maybe we should be more specific. Maybe we should actually say, it's not going to come out of a workshop app. Maybe we're using Quiver, right? So that's going to be our Quiver analysis, right? So we have a Quiver analysis with our financial data in a format that Andreessen Horowitz wants to see it in, and we're going to send it over there to help get investment. And, assuming it's all modeled on the ontology, maybe Andreessen Horowitz, we just directly connected to their ontology, and maybe they have something like, some sort of metrics for SaaS metrics. Maybe it's, what would be a good SaaS metric? Churn rate. Maybe we have a churn rate in there. Maybe we have our revenue. And actually it's monthly. Maybe we have monthly recurring revenue. So we do our MMR, or not MMR. This is how much I know about. Is it MMR? I forget. Or monthly recurring revenue model like that. I forget. I'm not a financial dude, so as you can all see, so maybe we have a churn rate, and maybe this is just the startup, right? And whoop, we lost our. Where did we go here? See, Lucid chart. If you're watching, that shouldn't be possible. All right, so we have a churn rate, and a startup has a, so I don't know what we call this, so maybe it's like has metric. And this is another has metric. I'm not really sure how you would model the relationships. But let's say Andreessen Horowitz is running Foundry, and that's how they're modeling their data. Now you can see the network effects starting to get amplified. Because Andreessen Horowitz was running Foundry, and because Foundry uses an ontology-based system to reason about, I can now model my financial metrics in a way that is universal and can be understood by Andreessen Horowitz or anyone else who's using this system, right? That is pretty powerful stuff when you start to think about it. And it becomes even more powerful when I get outside the Foundry system boundary, right? So let's take a look at what happens there. Because this is something we're exploring in the game plumbing framework right now through their socket servers, is how would we wire in applications to Foundry? Well, you can actually do that, right? So like we saw in the previous episode, where let's bring up here maybe a simple React application. And we're going to demo this, by the way. I will build a React application for game plumbing framework, and that React application is running there, has in it a wasmlib, which is the socket server. Fokker server, I like that. Socket server, right? Maybe I bring back that. I kind of like that actually. Fokker server. All right, so it has a wasmlib as a socket server, and we can build that to talk to these Foundry components over here. And if we bring up the ontology API up here, and now we add the communication layer through, it's actually going to go through a proxy. Let's just call this a application proxy. And that's running, and we'll label it appropriately, a server component, or a server object. Game plumbing framework calls these server objects. That'll go through a server object running out on the edge, and then that can actually talk to the ontology API in my game plumbing framework. But it can also talk to an ontology API over here as well, right? But you don't need to in Foundry, as far as I understand it, if these things are all connected, right? So like if I import the Andreessen Horowitz ontology and link to it and connect everything through phonograph for write back capability, I don't necessarily need to expose API layers over here. I can just build an app that everyone can access, right? So this app is open to the public that can now interact with the ontology API. That is another network effect where you start getting way more value for the system the more users can access this type of a setup, right? So why does it matter? Well, I can run applications that span multiple companies now, right? So like, let's just say I set up a business consortium, and this is my consortium and my consortium members. We can all work on specific parts of an app and deliver that value, but deliver all of the value of the underlying stack in these applications up here, or just the portions we want to expose. That's a fucking huge network effect, bro. Like building business consortiums where the software spans multiple organizations, that's powerful, man. That's like what we're trying to do in blockchain. That's what we're trying to do when we think about the future of software with distributed databases that span multiple cloud providers. It's all really the business value is how do I build a better consortium? What does that enable? Smaller companies that can deliver more value, right? So what are the network effects of Foundry? They're massive if they execute correctly. You know, if something like this is under development and actually brought to fruition, and I know that probably I do know that some of this is, I don't know if all of it is, but like a large portion of this is you already have the capabilities in the current feature set in Foundry to do this. But this is what I'm talking about when I say like this will generate huge network effects. Why, and what are the other leading indicators we have besides the template system in Foundry that something like this will come to fruition? Well, it's their sales strategy. Why do you set up partnerships with people like Hyundai Heavy Industries, or provide Foundry as a platform that any organization that's part of HHS can work with inside the government? It's to enable these type of network effects so you're all speaking the same language, you can all communicate and track your data and work together more effectively. That's my opinion anyway. I think that's why they do these strategic partnerships, why they're often careful about choosing their customers. It's one reason. It's not the only reason, but it's one reason, is that they want to enable these type of network effects. And the best way to do that is find a big organization that has lots of entities in it that will all standardize on Foundry, and all those entities can use Foundry and enable this type of application architecture. There's still some things to fill in the gap here. One of, not the least of which, is the right sort of the right way to talk about data, about ontologies. And there is a standard out there that essentially lets you define those things. Where did it go? I think it was here. I can't remember. No, it wasn't semantic web. There's a format called RDF, basically, that lets you talk about ontologies in a standard way, through like a file format that's very simple to write. And you can actually define these things and make them portable as part of, say, like a Foundry template. But why would you want to do that when they already have Foundry templates that let you import ontologies? Because there's been a lot of work done that's already based on the semantic web that already talks about these things, right? So like, I don't have to come up with a definition for a user or a game or an event or a service or DynamoDB or anything else. There's probably a definition that's suitable, that's already out there, that's been done by the semantic web and available via RDF for import. That just means this will happen way, way faster if Palantir executes appropriately and starts to leverage like technology like the semantic web and RDF, and getting their customers to think in terms of ontology apps, which they already do, but like doing it in a way in which we're leveraging pre-existing work and not reinventing the wheel. It'll just make things go faster. They don't have to do that to execute something like this. But yeah, this is the summary, right? This is why I think Palantir will generate huge network effects for its customers, why it matters, because we can deliver more business value with smaller companies. We can build better business consortiums that natively interoperate. That includes consortiums within large organizations like the government or these huge companies that they do work with, especially especially industry, energy industry, manufacturing. They're all going to want to operate this way because this is kind of how they operate already, but it's just done in a really kind of crappy way. So hope you guys get something out of this.